This is episode 43 of the Life in Norway show. Today I'm talking to someone that might have travelled further to be living here in Norway than any other guest I've had on the show. Emma Vestrheim is originally from Australia, but now lives in Bergen, where she works as a tour guide. We talk about what it's like to live in Norway's second biggest city, the differences between Australian life and Norwegian life, how she copes with the notoriously poor weather in Bergen, and the life of a tour guide in Norway. You can find out more information on everything we talk about today on the show notes page. Just head on over to lifeinnorway.net/podcast and look for episode 43. Happy listening. I'm joined today by Emma Vestrheim. She is originally from Melbourne, Australia, and moved to Norway in 2015. She now lives in Bergen, where she makes a living as a tour guide and writes the blog ilovebergen.net. Emma, welcome to the show.
Hello, thank you for having me.
Right, let's get going with the first question. What brought you to Norway in the first place?
So there were two things. Firstly, I married a Norwegian. I married someone from Bergen. And secondly, I did my master's degree in Scandinavian film and television. So I was working as a freelance critic, and I interviewed Scandinavians in English. I realized it'd be much easier if I just moved to Norway to pursue that job. So I convinced my husband to leave Australia and settle in Bergen with me.
So what's someone from Bergen doing in Australia to meet you in the first place?
Well, in Norway, it's very common for university students to take some government money and spend a year abroad. So he was actually doing a year abroad in Melbourne, and we met that way. We were long distance relationship for many years, and then he moved to Sydney. His work brought him there. And then after a year of living in Sydney, I said, my job's kind of sending me to Scandinavia.
Interesting. Now, I have to dig even a little deeper before we move on. I know people who grow up in the north of the UK or in the US and have Norwegian heritage that want to study Scandinavian studies, and I get that, it makes sense. What makes someone from Australia, literally the other side of the world, want to study Scandinavian studies?
It might get a little bit weirder. I was doing one of my theses in German Expressionism, so early German horror movies. And this was around the time that The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo was really taking off.
Right.
And I saw there was this huge interest in Scandinavian film and TV. Think of The Killing and The Bridge were coming out at this time. But no one was really writing about it in English. So I thought maybe I could jump on that. And I started my own website. I had a magazine that was published quarterly. And I was interviewing all these famous Scandinavians. And I thought, it's just my little niche. I actually taught at the University of Oslo for 2 years. Scandinavian film and TV.
Interesting. Okay, we could do a whole episode on this, I think. But we are going to talk about Bergen today. And what were your first impressions of Bergen? I imagine it's pretty different from Melbourne.
It's a little different, that's for sure. I'm a little bit lucky, I guess, compared to many people who've relocated to Norway, because I'd been coming here so many times before I decided to move here. I started dating my now husband in 2012, and I would fly to Norway 3 or 4 times a year.
Wow.
So when I settled here, I kind of knew what to expect. That's why I chose it. But I remember when I first came here in January 2012, it was my first ever time in Europe. And I remember thinking, it is so cold. And there were Norwegians skiing on the main street. And I'm like, this is like a postcard. I didn't think this actually happened in real life. But I just remember how cold it was, how pretty it was, and also how Norwegian it was. And I fell in love right away.
Okay, so that was back in 2015 or so. So now 5 years on, how do you feel about Bergen?
I still love Bergen. It feels like home. You know, I feel like I complain about the same things the locals complain about. I feel like it's my place. Working as a guide, I think I've really learnt to appreciate it for what it is. But at the same time, you know, some things about Bergen annoy me, like the weather. But it's just so pretty. I wouldn't want to live anywhere else, that's for sure.
So speaking of the prettiness, I will come on to talk about the weather, by the way, but speaking of the prettiness, for anyone who's not been to Bergen, they will have seen the image that gets shared whenever an article about Bergen is written, and I'm as guilty of this as anyone, of Bergen, the World Heritage Site, the colourful buildings along the harbour side. But that's obviously a very small part of the city. It's not an area that many people live in. They might live close to there. So what is it actually like as a city? Could you introduce Bergen to someone who's never been there?
So Bergen, it is a big city by Norwegian standards. It has a population of 280,000 people. But despite being one of the largest cities in Norway, it feels like a small town. So you can walk from one side to the other in about 20 minutes. There's no big skyscrapers, there's no traffic, there's no rush hour. So it has this small town charm, but yet it has all the facilities you'd expect of a big city. What's also really great about Bergen is that it's very historic. You go to cities like Oslo and they're very modern because Oslo wasn't built up until the late 19th century. You come to Bergen and you can pass buildings that were built in the 12th century or buildings that were built in the 18th century, and it's just so cute and it's so Norwegian. It's surrounded by 7 mountains. It's got fjords all around it. You know, it's the best place in Norway, in my very unbiased opinion.
Now let's talk about the weather. It's renowned as one of the rainiest places certainly in Norway, if not the world. What is it like when you wake up day after day and it's raining outside? Do you adjust to that ever?
Yes. Bergen does rain up to 280 days a year. So Bergen is a very rainy city. To be honest, most of the time it doesn't bother me because we count a rainy day if there's a drop of rain. So It's never really just pouring rain sideways for weeks on end. It's just a drizzle occasionally. That said, in July this year, last month, it rained almost every day. And for summer, you want it to be hot and sunny and go outside. So 3 weeks of rain, it just really brings you down.
Yeah, you want it to be dry at least, right? Because part of the thing of the Norwegian summer is just spending time outside. Oh, this year's a little bit different with the virus restrictions and everything, but you want to have utepils. You want to sit outside on a terrace and have a beer. Whether it's sunny or not, it's not so important. It's just being able to be outside, right?
Yeah, exactly. It's not being able to go outside without getting just wet that really does sort of weigh you down after a while. But that said, trust me, when you live in Bergen, you have so many anecdotes to sort of go back against all the comments about the rain. And whenever Bergen's sunny, like it is today, it's just incredible. So it makes up for 3 weeks of rain.
Okay, I'll take your word on that one. Now, when it comes to the differences between living in Australia and living in Norway, what are the things that leap out to you? And I'm thinking more about the lifestyle here.
Yeah, I mean, when I get asked that question, which is almost every tour I do, the obvious answer is the weather. So you couldn't pick 2 more different countries when it comes to the weather. But in terms of lifestyle, I think what really stands out for me is how sociable people are. For example, in Australia, whenever I go into a shop or if I see someone who I want to ask them something, I can just ask them or I can just talk to them. People in the shop ask how your day's been. They ask what you're getting up to, if you have any plans for the weekend. And I've sort of learnt here in Norway that you don't really ask anybody anything. You know, you sort of just keep quiet. You go to a grocery store, you ask for your bag, your receipt, and then you leave. There's no, oh, what are you wearing? That looks really nice. Or what are you doing this weekend? Or do you have any plans for summer? And that's really stood out to me. That's the biggest difference between the two. And another little one I like to point out, especially for Australians, is that in Bergen, you're not allowed to advertise in the city. And that might seem a bit strange, but when you go to a big city like Melbourne or Sydney, and even some big American cities, it's just billboards and ads everywhere. Whereas here in Bergen, they're not allowed to advertise. So it's nothing's screaming at you, nothing's trying to pull you in. And I think that's something not a lot of people realize when they come here. It's one of my secret little differences.
That's fascinating. It's something I haven't actually realized. I mean, you do notice it when you're walking around Bergen because the names of the stores are sort of just written on the frontages in a kind of old-fashioned font, and that's it. There's no neon signs, there's no golden M flashing there or anything like that. but I hadn't really considered the rest of the city. But yeah, it's something that's quite, now you've pointed it out, I don't think I'll ever be able to unsee that.
It's actually really refreshing once you see it. Like the buses don't have advertising, the bus stops don't have advertising, taxis, it's just quiet, and it feels really good once you know it's there.
You say it's quiet, and I do understand what you mean from what we've just said, but Bergen has a reputation in a normal year for being pretty overcrowded in the summer. Now, for someone who is a tour guide, that's probably a good thing for you, but what is it like as a resident of Bergen when the hordes of people arrive in June, July and August?
Well, I have a love-hate relationship with the crowds. I love it from a work point of view, but as a local, it can be very frustrating. Every morning, I have a view over the whole city from my apartment, and you just see these cruise ships come in. We used to be able to have up to 6 a day, and the whole city just gets covered in this layer of smog, which is really unpleasant. And then at Bergen, you can have up to 10,000 people walking on it a day. So Bergen's built on landfill into the water, so it is sinking, and then to have 10,000 people walking on it a day is just a nightmare for preserving it. Lifestyle wise, you just learn to not go into the city if you know there's going to be 6 cruise ships in. It's just so hard to move, and it's so hard to do your shopping that you just stay out and you stay in the suburbs, because people only ever stay at Bergen and the fish market.
Now, I don't want to date this podcast too much by talking about the virus, but it's difficult to talk about working as a tour guide in Bergen this year without mentioning that. So I want to come on to talk about working as a tour guide in general. But first of all, let's just address this elephant in the room. How has it been for you this year with virtually no tourists other than Norwegians in the city since March?
In summary, it's been very difficult. I was actually on a tour when the borders closed. I was supposed to board the Hurtigruten in Bergen and go to Kirkenes, but the ship was cancelled. So we decided to fly to Kirkenes. And I had 24 Australians with me. We couldn't land in Kirkenes because there was a storm, so the plane diverted to Lakselv. Once I landed in Lakselv, Once I landed in Lakselv, I got a call from my manager saying, the Prime Minister's just closed the borders. You need to get the Australians out of the country right away. You're not allowed to go to a hotel because they are within the quarantine period, so we'll be forced into a 2-week quarantine straight away. So I'm sitting in Lakselv in the middle of a snowstorm, midnight, with 24 Australians, and I basically just have to tell them, while we're sitting on the plane, to wait if we can go to Kirkenes. I tell them you have to call your travel agents and you have to book the next flight out of Norway. So there aren't many direct flights between Lakselv and Sydney. So we are talking with...
I think we have to just, for listeners, Lakselv is, I mean, I've never been there. It's one of the smallest airports in Norway, if not the smallest. It's in the middle of nowhere in the north. I hope I'm not insulting anyone who happens to be listening from there, but it is a very, very small place. And people are there from the other side of the world, and they're told you have to find your own way home.
Yes, yeah. Well, it's Lakselv. I discovered because I was trying to figure out where I could take them. There are no buses. There is one hotel, but I think it was closed. And then there's an airport, and that's it. So they all book flights. I speak to the flight attendants on the plane, and I say, "Look, can we come back with you to Oslo?" Because they were supposed to fly back to Oslo. And I say, there's this thing happening. I have to get these people out of the country. And they say, no problem, no problem. So after 2 hours in Lakselv, we try to land in Kirkenes again. Can't land because of a snowstorm, so we fly back to Oslo. We get to Oslo at 3:30 in the morning. The staff try to take us to a hotel, and I say, we're not going to a hotel. These people will be put in quarantine if they have to go to a hotel. So we sleep at Oslo Airport, and then almost my entire group are on a 7:30 flight to Doha to then take a flight to Sydney.
Wow.
So I don't know how we did it. I think I slept for about a month after that happened, but we did it.
And that actually gives a certain insight into the life of a tour guide, that it's not just about walking people around Bergen or accompanying them on the Hurtigruten. There's a lot more to it than that. So how is working as a tour guide? What are your roles and responsibilities?
So I never thought I would be a tour guide. When I moved here, as I mentioned before, I was teaching film. I was working as a freelancer in film. But I thought becoming a tour guide, firstly, would be one of the only jobs I could get because I didn't speak Norwegian. And secondly, I thought it would be a really good way to learn about the culture of a country, I knew nothing about Norway. So I did the job, and then I just fell in love with it. I mean, you get to do so many incredible things and go to so many amazing places that I wouldn't be able to go to by myself. I mean, I've done the Flam Railway more times than I can count, seen the Northern Lights so many times. You know, you just get to do all these things with people. But what's most important for me is that I find that a lot of people who come to Norway, they want to know the things you can't just Google. So they want to know, what is it like to live here? You know, what's schooling like? What's working here like? And whenever I do a tour, I like to talk about what it's actually like to live in Norway. And I think I have a unique advantage because I've been coming here for so many years. I feel like a Norwegian in a way. But at the same time, I am a foreigner. I'm from the other side of the world, so I get what it's like to come here for the first time. So working as a tour guide, I think it's really important to show people not just Bergen was founded in 1070 and Hanseatic League was here, but to show people what it's actually like being in Norway.
It sounds very similar to the life of someone who has travelled Norway writing a guidebook. There are many places I went to that I would never have. Most of the places I went to. Emma, let's hear a little bit about the kind of tours you're offering now.
Well, because of the coronavirus, I've realised that it's very unlikely that groups will be coming back to Norway anytime soon. So what I like to do is I like to do private tours. So all my tours are private tours, and I like to really customize it to what people are interested in. I'm not one of the tour guides who has a set structure for where I like to go and we follow the plan and we finish. I like to talk to my groups beforehand and figure out what they're interested in, what they've seen, and where they're going and where they've been as well. So I change everything according to what they want to do. I also do hotel. I start from their hotel, or I start from the Hurtigruten Pier, because many people come here in winter to do the Hurtigruten, to see the Northern Lights.
Excellent. Now, let's talk a bit about the must-see sites. Although you tailor your tours, there must be things that you show everyone, particularly in Bergen. So let's start in Bergen. Obviously, there's Bergen, but where else should someone who's visiting Bergen go? Let's say they're not on a cruise ship. They have more than an hour for a quick run around Bergen. What's your recommendation?
So if you ever see one of those pictures of Bergen again, look behind it. Look behind the wooden houses. On the hill, you'll see these homes that are actually older than the wooden houses on Bergen, and you'll see the forest. So a 10-minute walk from the famous Bergen up takes you not only through historic homes, but it takes you into the woods. And not many big cities can claim to have that. So I think anyone who's coming to Bergen needs to just get off the wharf, get off the Bergen, the harbour, and go up, go into the hills. So that would be my biggest must-see. I always take people into the secret little alleys I've discovered on my morning walks. If you aren't a strong hiker, you can do Fjellveien. Fjellveien is a trail that goes along the mountain, so it's flat. If you want to go up, you can go all the way to Fløyen, which is one of Bergen's 7 mountains. It takes about 45 minutes to get there by hiking. And then my other big thing I tell everyone to do is go to the Edvard Grieg Museum and go to the concert. Don't just go into the museum, but you have to do the concert. It's my favorite thing to do.
Tell us a bit about that concert. What's special about it?
So every day between May and September, they have a lunchtime concert at 1 p.m. They invite a pianist from either somewhere in Norway or somewhere around the world, and they give a half-an-hour performance of Edvard Grieg music. So they do not just his greatest hits, but they do lesser-known pieces, and the pianists actually talk about each piece. So they'll explain, what was Grieg thinking when he wrote this? How has he performed it? You know, what point in his life was this piece? And that makes it super interesting. I love those concerts.
Excellent. Now, Bergen is a common place to start a trip of Norway for people, mainly because of the Hurtigruten, but I do hear from a lot of people who are planning to base themselves in Bergen. So if somebody has, let's say, a week and they spend a couple of days in Bergen, what would be your recommendation for where else they should go if they want to see the nature of Norway?
If you want to get out, the most popular thing to do is Norway in a nutshell, which is the 12-hour train journey to Flam, Myrdal, and Gudvangen. That's really popular, and it feels really popular when you get there. If you go there in May, June, July, August, September, It's so crowded. It's just tricky to enjoy it when you're just being pushed from public transport to public transport in a crowd of 300 people. If you want to get out of doing that, if you want something to yourself, I always tell people to go to the Hardangerfjord. It's south of Bergen, whereas Flom is on the Sognefjord, which is north of Bergen, roughly the same distance from the city. So if you go to the Hardangerfjord, you can go to these famous cider trails where you can visit the farms. I actually did this on the weekend. You can go to the farms, you can meet the farmer, and they'll tell you how the cider's made, and then you can buy some straight from the farmer. And then on top of that, there are all these famous hikes to do, such as Trolltung, I know is the most popular. But for me, I like to go to Ulvik, I like to go to Norheimsund and do the hikes there. If you do have a little bit more time, I would strongly recommend doing the Hurtigruten. I just think it is unmissable. No matter which time of year you come here, I really think the Hurtigruten is worth the money, the small fortune that it costs.
You've mentioned a couple of times groups of Australian tourists that you've guided. I assume you guide tourists from all around the world, it's not just Australia?
I mostly do American groups. So
Okay.
The big 3-week tours I do is for Americans.
Now, my experience when I was traveling Norway, researching the guidebook, is Americans, in particular Americans, they ask a lot of questions, especially when they find out you're researching a guidebook. And I asked them a lot of questions as well. And the reason was I wanted to know what I should put in the guidebook. I wanted to know what they wanted to know about Tromsø or Lofoten or wherever we were. So what are the most common questions you get from your tour groups? And are there any strange or funny ones that sort of appear fairly often?
So the most commonly asked questions I get typically have to do with salary, education system, why does everyone speak such good English? It's those really simple questions. They want to know the basics. When it comes to looking at Bergen, I mean, they want to know the history, but they want to know what it's like to live here because it's so different. And, everyone hears about Norway as being the best country in the world, the most advanced, the safest, best welfare system. And I guess they come here with that curiosity of, is that true? Like, is it actually, this utopia that everyone else claims it to be? I mean, no, it's not a utopia, but it's doing pretty well for itself. So those are the common questions I get. I can't remember any strange questions I get because I have to keep a straight face every time someone asks me just this bizarre question. But I have gotten a lot of questions that have made me go, how have I never thought about that in the 5 years that I've lived here? Like, there are these metal strips on the ground that heat to stop ice coming over. And someone said, what's that? And I'm like, I've walked over this path for 5 years and I've never once gone, what's that? So it's those things that sort of get me. But I will tell you a really funny story. In my first year of guiding, I took a group up Mount Flyen on the funicular. We were looking out over the view from the top, and then someone in my group points to an island called Uskoy, if you want to Google it. But it's just, you can see it from the funicular. And they point to this island and they go, is that England? And in my most professional face, I had to go, no, that's still Bergen. That's still Norway. So that has always stuck with me.
Coming back to living in Bergen, Emma, we spoke a little before I started recording about language, and you're in the process of taking the test, the Bergen's test, as it's called, which is basically the test you need to get permanent residence or citizenship in Norway. It's renowned as being quite tricky. But another thing that's renowned as being quite tricky is the Bergen dialect. How have you managed to cope with one of the more curious dialects in Norway?
Yes, the Bergen dialect is notoriously hard because they sound like a mixture of Danish speakers, Dutch speakers, and then fishermen who have never spoken to another person in their lives. So it's just this incredibly thick accent and you don't know what they're saying. To be honest, I can't roll my R's like most Norwegians can. You don't do that in Australia. I just speak English. I think what a lot of people experience when they move here is that every Norwegian is going to speak English to you. Even if I go into a shop and put on my best Norwegian accent and my best Norwegian phrase, they're going to pick up something and they're going to switch to English. So to be honest, since I've moved here, I've never had to struggle with the Bergen dialect. That said, every time I'm taking a new language course or I'm finding a new language tutor, I find someone based in Oslo. I don't want to do the Bergen one.
But then again, in Bergen, you have the added problem of ninos, the written language, which is different from. It's not a different language. It's essentially different spellings of words and the odd different word thrown in as well. It's a different flavour of Norwegian, if you like. And a lot of people I've met from Bergen, they write in ninos. So do you read ninos? Can you read ninos, or you stick to bokmål?
It's really interesting because this year all of the counties changed and they reassigned, and Bergen used to be part of Hordaland, now it's part of Vestlandet, and ever since then Bergen's decided it's just going to be the capital of Western Norway. Anyone who knows Bergen knows that we have a famous saying, I'm not from Norway, I'm from Bergen. We're our own thing. So ever since this, Bergen has decided to become the capital of Western Norway, and everyone in Western Norway uses nynorsk. Almost everyone. I'm making a massive generalization there. So all of the public transport signs have gone from being in bokmål to nynorsk. And if I was on the bus 2 years ago, I could read the signs. I get onto the bus now and I'm like, what are they saying to me? It's just so different on paper, nynos.
I did not know that. So since the change at the beginning of the year, they've actually been changing signs in Bergen and things like that.
And some of the newspapers now also write in nynorsk. And I've gone from being able to read it to not being able to read it. So that's the difference. I mean, if someone spoke nynorsk to me, it's not a spoken language. You wouldn't be able to pick it up. But I could be reading an article and I'm like, have I forgotten my 4 or 5 years of Norwegian education? Why can't I read this? And it's because it's in nynorsk. It has a very mixed reaction here in Bergen. People are not so happy about it.
I bet. Interesting. I'm learning something today. Now, Emma, you're a blogger like me, and you also have a .net website like me. You have ilovebergen.net. So what was the thought process behind starting the site, and what's on there for people to find?
It's been something I've been wanting to do ever since I moved here, because I know it's maybe a bit of a cliche for expats to come to Norway and start a blog, but I figured through my job I would be able to write some useful information on what to see and do, because, again, my job provides me opportunity I would not be doing by myself. So I've sort of been doing it off and on ever since I moved here. I'm normally so busy that I never have the time to sit and write anything. But with this pandemic going on, I've been like, this is what I want. I want to start my own tours. This is how I do it. So I write useful travel information for Bergen, Hurtigruten, and the Arctic. So I don't just talk about here's what you can do. In my articles, I try to explain why we do it. So, for example, I just released an article about hiking up and down Mount Fløyen. And I don't just talk about the directions to get up and down, but I talk about, like, there used to be a farm here and the farmer was this and he did this. So I try to provide useful information that people might want to know. So those who want to learn more about the culture of Norway, that's what my blog tries to focus on. Excellent.
Now, we'll move on to the standard questions I ask every guest on the Life in Norway show. So some quick answers to these, please, Emma. What's the best thing about living in Norway?
The freedom, getting to do what I want, having the feeling that I can be anything I want to be, I can go into any career I want, just the freedom. I feel really like myself in Norway.
And what about the most challenging thing?
The language barrier and the social barrier, not being able to talk to somebody, not being able to ask something, that's challenging.
And this is always an interesting question for someone who works in travel. What's your favourite place in Norway? And if you say Bergen, I'm going to ask you to be a bit more specific than that.
Well, of course, as a tour guide, I will say Bergen. But as someone who has come from another country and has gotten to see every corner of this beautiful, beautiful country, for me, I always get most excited when I'm doing a tour and we're going to a tiny, tiny town in Arctic Norway. One of my favourite places to do a walking tour for my group is in Hammerfest, because it is, you're like, how do people live here? And that's just so interesting to me. So anywhere in the Arctic is just my favorite place, especially if it's winter and there's the Northern Lights.
Lovely. So Bergen is renowned for its 7 mountains. You've mentioned that already. I guess you spend a lot of time hiking, walking around the city, and you must have a recommendation for where you can get the best view of the city from.
So a lot of people go to Fløyen, the funicular, of course. I live on the mountain, one of Bergen's 7 mountains, called Løvstokken. Løvstokken's opposite Fløyen. I'm looking at Fløyen right now. Løvstokken's behind me. So if you go to Løvstokken, you walk 45 minutes up to a mountain called Strand of Yellow, like beach mountain. You get this incredible view. You can see the houses of Bergen, you can see the bay, the islands, all the other mountains, and no one knows about it but the locals. So I go up there, I take a look, and lie down.
I'm just thinking, I don't think I've ever seen a photo from there, or maybe one. It's not one that's particularly well known, unlike the pictures from Fløyen, which are 10 a penny.
I think the view from the mountain behind my house, the Strand of Yellow, is so much nicer than Fløyen. So there you go. There's a nice little local tip for you. If you come to Bergen, Fløyen's great. Løvstokken's where it's at.
Great stuff. Emma, where can people find out more about you and the tours that you offer?
Yep, so you can go to my blog, ilovebergen.net, and I'm also on all major social media platforms if you want to keep up to date with information about what I'm doing or what you can do in Bergen, Western Norway, and the Hurtigruten.
Thanks, Emma. This has been great. Thanks for joining us.
No worries. Thanks for having me.